Hello and welcome to the Digital Publishing Podcast with Simon Mellins and Simon Holt. Episode 15, Scaffolding the Fantastical. In this episode, we're joined by Dr. Kyle Keane, Senior Lecturer in Assistive Technologies within the School of Computer Science at the University of Bristol. Welcome back. We are thrilled to bring you our first podcast of 2026. That doesn't sound like a real year, does it? Before introducing our guest, joining me as usual is my lovely co-host, Simon Holt. Simon, how was your winter break?
My winter break was brilliant. Went far too quickly, but I'm really glad to be back, and especially glad to be back on the podcast, working with you and with our great guest today, and feeling very excited for what's in store over the next year for accessibility and beyond.
Brilliant. And on that note, please do get in touch if you're listening to the podcast and you have ideas for guests. You can always email me. It's contact@simonmellins.com as we seek to add more guests to the roster and bring you plenty of really cool and interesting interviews this year. But back to this episode, our special guest this time is Dr. Kyle Keane, Senior Lecturer in Assistive Technologies within the School of Computer Science at the University of Bristol. Kyle, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Simon. I'm excited to be here.
We're very honoured that you came to join us for this podcast. Perhaps you could just begin by telling us a bit about yourself and about your work for those who haven't come across you before.
Yes, so I am very fixated on creating technologies that can help people do things that they want to do. So technologies that assist people, especially persons living with disabilities, who have particular life activities that they want to accomplish that they believe technology can help them to achieve.
And could you maybe talk a bit about how your personal experience of sight loss informs this direction of your career?
Yeah, happily. So I have retinitis pigmentosa, which is a degenerative eye disease that has caused progressive vision loss over the course of my life. I'm now fairly solidly middle-aged and almost completely blind. I use screen readers, which are technologies that describe things on my screen and read text out loud using a computer voice as a way to access computers. But over the course of my life, I have managed to use all sorts of other computer adaptations, starting with a very simple standard computer setup and modifying it to each one of the phases of my vision loss by changing the colors, changing the font size, having it speak to me. I've been modifying my computer so that I can do my work very consistently over the course of my life.
And so, Kyle, obviously for you, I know you because of the work we've done together in your research lab at the University of Bristol, but I also know that your career is quite broad and you've done quite a few different things in the technology space and in the education space, quite a bit beyond and before that as well. So would you mind giving the readers just a summary of kind of how you arrived at where you've arrived at, and all the different things that you've been doing throughout the past, many odd years?
Yeah, happy to. And it is, I know, I accidentally pigeonhole myself occasionally by talking about my deepest passion, which is assistive technology. But my PhD is actually in computational quantum physics. So I was doing work simulating quantum computers long ago as the theoretical and computational support for an experimental physicist who ended up being acquired by Google, and just this year won the Nobel Prize in Physics, which is quite an exciting thing to have rubbed elbows with some intellectual giants.
So it sounds easy.
Oh yeah, no, it was. It didn't challenge my entire sense of reality at any point. Yeah, so that was, my. It's kind of a funny thing. I came into college at university never having touched a computer, and within a few years became really obsessed with the things that we could do inside of a computer that could help us to model, predict, and engineer the world around us. And never would I have predicted that I would have been able to even just hold my own in a room with some of the physicists who I got to engage with during my PhD. But as I got to the end of the time of my PhD, I had gotten some really nice publications, one of which I'm very proud to say still gets published on the regular. I get sort of 3 to 4 notifications that it's being cited again and again and again over the decades at this point. And I was already getting impacted very severely by my sight loss and the inability of computer systems to adapt that would allow me to continue to do the level of physics that I was obsessed with. And part of that is, mathematical expressions were already becoming quite challenging. So, if I say A plus B divided by C, we already run into a verbal ambiguity where do I mean A plus the quantity B divided by C, or do I mean the quantity A
Yeah.
plus B and quantity all divided by C? Even in expressing that in words, that's going to be confusing for a lot of listeners. I'm sorry.
Right.
This
Right.
is part of the challenge is verbal expressions of mathematics are not equivalent to spatially laid out unambiguous visual
Hmm.
representations. And I became really obsessed with this perceptual, cognitive, social construct that we call mathematics and highly technical communication. And I ended up deciding, quantum computing was going to move forward with or without me. I was contributing some unique things, but I felt really drawn to go in a direction that, I felt compelled intellectually to explore, which was this representation and communication of scientific and technical concepts. I went and worked at a software company known as Wolfram Research that builds a product called wolframalpha.com and a scientific computing software called Mathematica. The Wolfram language is a programming language. And I went there to explore some of these foundational concepts of the human computer interface of mathematics and scientific computing is a fairly non-trivial thing where you need to represent concepts in a way that allow a human to operationalize them, engage with them, and move a computation forward. So I spent a number of years exploring interface design. How do we increase font sizes? What fonts are better recognized by different communities? Do color changes help? If you make something dynamic, how do you represent that in the most meaningful way to people at different educational levels and expertises? I started to explore not just the visual interface adaptations, but also some of the alternative representations. So if you have a mathematical quantity and you want to represent it as a number, like the number 2, we have things like number lines. As children, you say 2 plus 2, you can like count 1 2, and then you count 2 more, 3 4, and you say, okay, 2 plus 2 is 4 because I can count 2 twice and I end up at 4. These are all these sort of funny verbal tricks, but they are visually represented in various standardized ways. And what are the equivalent sonic representations, audio representations that can allow a mind to engage and operationalize these concepts in the same way as these socially constructed mathematical representations? So I spent a few years sort of at this funny interface of building practical software, which was exploring some of these alternate representations and what ended up being fairly cutting edge technology, which was if I want to represent mathematics to a blind person 20 years ago, all I have is a single speaker on a computer, a little audio generator, and I'm going to use speech. And at that time, some of the mobile assistants like Siri or Google were starting to speak results to questions that we were asking them. We're now in this, age of AI where we can have all sorts of long form discourse. At the time, you could ask it really simple things like, what is 2 plus 2? And it would say 2 plus 2 is 4. And it ended up being that a lot of the work I had done to help blind people get access through this alternative representation of mathematics through sound started to find a home inside of mainstream technology as people engaged with these virtual assistants more and more. So I spent a number of years at the intersection of digital accessibility and the mainstream adaptation and deployment of that technology into the wider ecosystem. After a few years as a software developer, building out some of these tools, researching some of these questions, I ended up getting the scientific itch again, and I moved into computational material science at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where I started teaching mathematical and computational methods for material science, which did lead to quite an interesting 10 years teaching mainstream um, computational science in various departments around that institute. And, um, as with many things, started to explore and push some of the boundaries of artificial intelligence. Ended up in a very interesting research laboratory called the Quest for Intelligence in the College of Computing, where we are trying to understand the intersections between natural intelligent systems and artificially intelligent systems. What can we learn from, the human brain or natural communication emergent properties of systems that start to engage in complex behavior, and how can we engage with those and model those and mimic those through artificial intelligence systems? Or I became quite obsessed with the characterization of these systems. So even in quantum mechanics and quantum computing, my specialty was in measuring and characterizing quantum systems that are capable of doing things that are quite hard to describe in simple words. So similarly, intelligent systems do stuff that pushes some of the bounds of what we can even describe their ability to do, which is why we have complex fields of study.
Right, and Kyle, um, one thing that I've been particularly impressed with our work together has been about the application of this in various fields. And I know that as part of your career, you worked with, I think, one or two companies where you were liaising with publishers, right? And obviously, this is the digital publishing podcast. And so it would be great just to draw everything you said there back to your work with some of these organizations. And it would be great to hear a bit about what you did and especially how you worked with the publishing industry and what that was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it was quite a complex, tumultuous relationship between some of the cutting edge work of representing science and mathematics in ways that were compatible with screen readers or alternative ways of thinking, knowing, and communicating. So, especially in the years at Wolfram Research, I spent a lot of years in partnerships building out proof of concepts and prototypes of systems that could be plugged into commercial publishing platforms. So, if somebody at the time, a good example, EduPub was an EPUB variant. If I can get mildly geeky in the publishing world, it's
Hmm.
you know,
Please do.
digital format that allows for ebooks, and ebooks at the time were scalable text. So you put text and it can reflow like a Kindle typically does. And they were starting to explore what happens if we put not just a graphic in there, which maybe can resize dynamically. What if we dared to put an interactive graphic, a dynamic scientific graphic, so that when a reader comes to it, they can change an interface knob, and the visualization is going to change dynamically in real time. So if we have a pie chart and somebody can select the year that they want to draw data from, and make the pie chart represent the data from that year, we're already into this dynamic interactive interface. And digital publishing at the time had no standards for doing this. This had typically been done with JavaScript and HTML on the web, and EPUB variants weren't yet adopting any of these dynamic interactive standards. So we were looking at, do you speak those results out to a screen reader? Can you add sonifications that are standardized? Can you, if you are going to speak it out, can you build out templates that are going to be cognitively reliable for a reader? One of the reasons a pie chart is a powerful tool of communication is because we teach people, here's how to interpret a pie chart. Each little wedge is like the size of a piece of pizza. And if that person takes a bigger piece of the pizza, then you can realize that that's a smaller piece. There's some sort of physical intuition about what a pie chart representation is, and it's consistent. If you start to look at verbally representing that data, then if you change the way that you describe it every time, then nobody can have a sense of reliably engaging with a construct that they can have an intuition about. So if one person describes a pie chart as a circle with, bisecting lines through it at an angle of 15 degrees, and another person describes a pie chart with four wedges, the different wedges have these particular sizes. Um, you can't quite build the same level of a consistent model as you can visually when you come to the same visual representation. So I spent many years trying to push for advanced sort of anticipatory standards that would allow for interactive and dynamic content to be built that would be screen reader compatible, as well as sort of consistent and engageable in an equivalent way. We used to have the phrase pedagogical
Hmm.
equivalence. That was a mantra of the time when I came up in digital accessibility, which is to say, if a representation cannot teach somebody the same concept in an equivalent way, then it's not equivalent just because it has the same data. If
Hmm.
it doesn't have the same pedagogical outcomes for students, then it's not actually equivalent. So I spent, yeah, a number of years really pushing for kind of dynamic and interactive content. And then when I was at MIT, I worked a lot in online educational settings, building out these online courses that then incorporated some of these interactive content, and we did large scale studies of, if you split an online course, you take each one of the students and you split half of them into a group where they get a dynamic interactive visualization, and the other half into a group where they only get a standard image. How do the learning outcomes of those two groups end up being impacted by the type of stimulus you're giving them, by the type of educational content that they're getting during the course? And so seeking that proof of pedagogical equivalence, or in this case, trying to show that dynamic content, in fact, does have um, pedagogical outcomes that are superior to static images because it gives a sense of dynamism and movement and can engage some of the physics inside of the mind when you're teaching somebody about particular concepts. So spent a lot of time trying to push for, interactive content while realizing that the, single audio source does not provide an equivalent of pedagogical experience for a blind student. Not that it can't, it just doesn't, because we don't even have standards for an ebook to have interactive audio content. We may have some SVG, scalable vector graphics, that can move if you change a thing nowadays, but we don't have audio engines built into these publishing platforms. So trying to give somebody an immersive three-dimensional spatial audio environment in which they can have objects moving around them is unthinkable because we don't have standards for stereo audio, let alone mono audio inside of these.
And on this idea of kind of intersection of ed tech and publishing, um, I think we often get tired in the EPUB side of things because so many brilliant standards are worked out and brilliant technologies exist, but then rolling things into a kind of functional standard can take so long, and then making sure that everything is available to users and works nicely with assistive technology all ends up being very difficult, and I think ends up with our um, industry can perhaps lag a bit. Do you have any kind of thoughts on this lag between developed standards and kind of applied standards for people actually trying to read and learn?
Oh, you're really pushing on a pressure point there. So,
Good, good.
um, yeah, thoughts. I have plenty of thoughts. Thoughts that should be shared publicly. Maybe I'll have more decorum. It's frustrating. It's difficult, and I don't know many better ways to move things forward. So I think it's really essential that we come to standards agreements. It's hard being, having spent 10 years really deeply immersed in standards bodies and watching multiple companies and nonprofits all fighting over what should and should not be included, because if you include one thing, it's going to remove the competitive edge of a company's platform. And so they say, well, no, if we standardize it, nobody has a competitive advantage anymore. And if we don't standardize it, then the biggest gorilla in the room is going to win because they're going to be able to do more things. And without standardization of protocols, the proliferation of software required to make an assistive technology compatible is unmanageable. So, if every single website, for instance, had a completely different protocol for a screen reader to access the text that was on the website, it would mean that every website would have to build its own compatibility hooks, or the community of blind engineers who are trying to build out assistive technology hooks would have to build hooks into each one of these websites. That means, just an infinite amount of work nowadays. If we do what was done for a really long time and still continues to be done to some degree, which is have web standards for, you're going to write an HTML. HTML, we can now write an interface layer for screen readers to access HTML and interpret it and speech synthesize it for a blind user who's using a screen reader. That standardization is essential so that we can then, as a community, manage far fewer interfaces to try to get this access to information available to assistive technology users. But it takes a really long time, and I think often is antithetical to some corporate interests, which can be really hard. There are wonderful companies that fight for standards because they realize, you know, their mission is the dissemination of information, and increasingly having reliable and responsible information dissemination is a valuable resource in this world, and there are great
Yeah.
companies that fight for that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before we move on to the other kind of really meaty topic that I think we'd like to cover today, which is going to be focusing on the innovation work that you've been involved in, Kyle, and around AI. I did just want to finish off this section by talking a little bit and asking you a little bit about some of the conversations that you and I have had. And obviously, we presented together at a conference in DC last autumn around how universities and publishers can work together to improve outcomes for people with disabilities, right? And obviously, you just talked there quite a lot about standards and about dissemination of knowledge. And obviously, we talk here about kind of trustworthy content and trustworthy processes. And so, I wonder, given your experience both in the university sector and also working with companies in the broader educational sector and having interface with publishers as well, what your thoughts were about some ways that you think that publishers and universities might work together to improve outcomes around for disability inclusion and accessible publishing and technology.
Right. And I think, not to get too I'm not sure what the even right word is, but there's a call to action to be had by the few organizations in this world who can stand up against large large organizations with competing interests. If I am to
Mhm.
be sort of politically correct about how to phrase this, universities, stand for should stand for an educated public that has the ability to be critical
Right.
and be grounded in, you know a measure of truth and understanding about what and how we construct realities together. um, they are often not, resourced enough to get that information out to the broader dissemination into the world, which is where publishers come along. So universities can generate wonderful content without the powerhouse and the infrastructure of publishers. We can't compete with some of the other information dissemination mechanisms such as social media or traditional media outlets.
Right.
So there is a real, in my view, a moral obligation to, amplify and push for the types of information we want to ensure that the public has access to. And some of that is, a a right to be critical and confrontational against information dissemination that is not stemming from our belief in what is, grounded in evidence-based, research-based information. And one of the wonderful things and incredibly difficult things in the publisher's ecosystem is to ensure that although the incentives for academics are to publish, 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 that they're still holding enough friction and forcing enough critical peer review to stop echo chambers of, academics spinning out into echo chambers that have an authority by assumed group strength. And that is a requirement of the publishers, and they do an incredible job trying to engage peer review panels and ensure that there's critical analysis and that that information that is coming out of universities, which, not to be even more kind of controversial, but not all information that comes out of any institution is pure truth, and we need systems in place to filter and push against those things. And a university on its own will have the incentive to self promote its work. A publisher's job is to sit and compare those across institutions
Hmm.
and ensure that there's discourse happening on a scale that can't happen individual to individual. We need institution to institution discourse.
I'm wondering if there's something about scalability here as well. So, one of the things that I've been thinking quite a bit about recently is, and maybe this will help us transition to the next bit, is around um, automated tools, so AI tools to help drive accessibility features like alt text, right? And there's been some very interesting research done at, for example, um, the Ohio State University and the University of Nevada as well, around, um, and I think in Arizona too, around uh, AI bots, if you like, to create alt text. And clearly this is something that is progressing quite a lot. But when I speak to the researchers involved, they have amazing ideas. But just because of where they work, what they're not able to is really think about how this may be able to be scaled to an industrial level. And I wonder whether that's really a really good opportunity for partnership there, where you've got some of the commercial acumen maybe of some publishers and technology companies and the research that you get at universities to really provide solutions that are then scalable, and then we can share a lot more broadly. I guess that's how I would see it. And I don't know, Kyle, whether that kind of resonates with you or whether that you don't quite see it that way.
It's a very yes and moment,
Yes.
where the and is maybe not just building, but saying both are necessary. So I do think there's a wonderful power in the ability for commercial industry partners to scale and disseminate in a way that has standardization, quality control, um, sustainability, like reliably sustainable, not just kind of green sustainable, but it has
Hmm.
longevity. Let's say it will exist in 10, 20, 30 years, which is an essential thing. If information can't be, preserved, sustained, and relied on for 50 or 100 years, that means it's very easy for people who can play longer term games to just outlive the shared memory of our institutions. So we need to be able to rely on partners who can stabilize and sustain information to pass generation to generation. I think there's a scale across time that industry partners have a great probability of success at. Scaling across the number of people in this world is boggling to my mind. I've thought about some really large numbers in my life, but thinking about how to get information to billions of people across globes, across country lines. I can make something work on my local computer. If I want to get that information across country lines, there's very complex geopolitical information exchange policies that, companies have infrastructure set up in order to ensure that boundaries are not being crossed and information is not being disseminated in ways that, governments deem to be, dangerous to, systems. There are certainly, people who, if they had access to certain information, would use it to hurt others. That is an ethical and complex quandary that I, as an individual, don't want to have sitting
Mm.
completely on my shoulders. I think companies and industry partners have infrastructure for navigating that in ways that individuals don't. And that all, and as you say, this sort of scalability. If you think about the number of new scientific journal articles being published. I remember somebody shared a number with me, and I don't remember what the number was, but I remember the emotional shock of, if you had to pay a human to scientifically accurately describe every image in every new journal article, you would have to have a small army of people all day long working on describing these things, and they would have to be expert enough in those topic areas to
Mm.
not just describe a picture as a picture of a squiggly line, but to say, this is an EKG reading of a patient in a hospital with an abnormality inside of their, left ventricle. That's my vague attempt at being specific enough to communicate scientifically. And finding those people and being able to have an expert on demand to do alt text at that scale is incredibly staggering. I absolutely think we need to have standard, reliable, quality assured industry partners doing this. And I think that we can start looking at um, decentralized systems that can provide levels of publicly maintained infrastructure to hold these systems accountable and to ensure that, the incentives that might, accidentally, unintentionally corrupt the outcomes of different organizational evolutions. We need, as people, to have access to decentralized systems where, I and, you know a few thousand academics all are, donating some of our electricity and our computer power to ensuring that things are validated in ways that we can use to provide a baseline alternative reliability metric. And I don't think either one of those can exist without the other
Mm.
one being there to hold it accountable.
Yeah, that makes total sense.
If I can then bring us from the vast and theoretical to some of the things that are happening now, um, what are some of the ways, Kyle, that you see AI being transformative for people with disabilities? I'm thinking as readers and perhaps even within the publishing industry, it's sort of enabling people to participate in this kind of gate-kept discourse.
With the emergence of I think one place I like to start. So I have a PhD in computational quantum physics. I've worked on major software projects that deployed to, probably a billion people, asked Siri questions during the time it was running my code. I worked in artificial intelligence at MIT. I taught the intro to AI and machine learning at MIT. I'm now over at the University of Bristol in the School of Computer Science. I am, if anyone should be comfortable in AI, I feel like I should be one of them. the implications of AI still confound and befuddle me. It is a massive paradigm shifting moment. And I think a lot of people are having to have really deep evaluations of how this is going to impact people. And some of the ways that it impacts me as a blind scientist are slowly being revealed in my experiments using it to do things. I have to constantly think, why don't I just try that? Let's see if it can do that thing. Part of the disability that's induced by blindness when trying to access computers is a time bandwidth limit. So a synthetic voice, if I hit a web page, I have to, even if I'm trying to jump through each one of the headings, I have to use keyboard shortcuts and cognitive effort to keep myself structured in exploration and trying to interrogate the system and pull information out and get a sense of what's on the web page. That's a time and cognitive bandwidth issue. So it might take me, if I'm sighted, I get used to design patterns and I can quickly glance without any knowledge of any of the words at the general design of a web page and find the region where I'm looking for a thing. With a screen reader, I'm developing some shorthands to achieve that, but it still takes me significantly more time to achieve that. Even if I'm looking for a login button, which tends to be in the upper right hand
Right.
corner, it takes me time and exploration to get there.
Right. The
Um,
cognitive effort and the cues are kind of spread are spread among fewer senses, right? As you said, it's bandwidth.
yeah, it just takes more time, it takes more steps. The emergence of especially agentic AI systems where one can land in some of these newer agentic web browsers and say, click the login button, and presuming that the website hasn't done anything completely insane, many of these agentic systems will find the login button and click it. There is this sort of progressive disclosure UX pattern emerging where they hide things by design, which is kind of strange to me. But um, AI and especially agentic AI is starting to get even more efficient than sometimes sitting with a sighted colleague who isn't tech literate. So there are services where I can, get a sighted colleague to try to help me do something on a computer. And if they're not used to um, interface design, and I've been studying it for years and years and years, I can say, oh, please get to this thing. And they'll say, like, I don't see that thing. I don't know what that word means. I don't know what it means to log into a website. None of what you're saying do I know how to operationalize and functionalize into an action. Um, that can be really frustrating. AI in a lot of instances now can just do the thing. So if
Right.
I, as a blind user who can't see the screen, and I have access to a screen reader, which means I could get there eventually. If I can have an agentic system that is actually functional, it means I can get that step done and move on to the next step. I need to do thousands of things to get through a particular task. If I want to consume a scientific article, I need to look through the abstracts of multiple articles. If I want to go website to website to website and tab until I hit the right part of the website in order to read it, and then jump to the next website, and then tab and tab and tab and tab until I get to the abstract, am I going to remember the previous one with all those steps in between? Maybe, maybe not. Depends how how my mind is doing that day. Right now, I can ask for deep research in some of the commercial AI products and say, please surface 10 academic publications related to this topic, and it will surface 10 things, and I can say, okay, great, now read me those abstracts. There's a danger in that it will hallucinate. It will make up scientific articles that are not well grounded in reality. Depending on which AI service you're using, they have different levels of cooperation with publishers. Some of them are really well grounded and connected directly into academic databases so that they can, in fact, surface reliable and non hallucinated articles. and some of them will just make up things that sound like scientific articles. That's a very complex system to try to engage in, but it's a wonderful place where publishers and AI together can give people access to information in a way that's compatible for them. Some people prefer to spend time talking about a single article and then jump to another article and spend some time talking into that article. Some people prefer to hear the abstract of 10 articles back to back to back to back. Those are personal cognitive differences that work better for each individual. AI can allow for this differentiated interface if we are sort of surfacing them and connecting them to reliable data structures. And oh yes, sorry, that was a more general, vague philosophical statement. I will follow that up with a very specific and very strong assertion that if you look at the definition of disability, which I subscribe to, which is in the World Health Organization, it's the same as many other definitions around the world. There's an impairment that's present in a person, there's a activity limitation, and there's a participation restriction. The activity limitation of being able to go through 1,000 scientific articles to be able to surface the ones that align and extract meaningful protocols so that one can move science forward is eliminated if we can do that faster. If it still takes me 1,000 times longer than a sighted colleague to achieve it, the disability is still there because the activity is still limited in my ability to achieve it on a reasonable time scale. If AI makes that faster and keeps it as reliable, now it has actually eliminated in that particular context the the threefold component of the disability in that context. The impairment still may affect other things, but in that particular life activity of trying to participate in scientific research, good technology can eliminate the the implications of having an impairment because it removes the activity limitation and allows for full participation.
That makes total sense, and I think it's very good to frame this in terms of the social model of disability in terms of participation. One thing that I wanted to ask you about specifically, Kyle, was I know that you ran a student symposium recently around innovation, around assistive technology, and obviously I'm sure AI played quite a role in that. So could you just tell the listeners a little bit about the symposium, what some of the proposals were, and what you learned from the day?
Yeah, I'm very proud to have kickstarted this. I'm calling it Access Bristol. And it is a small local disability led assistive technology accelerator, and hopefully with more and more support from various stakeholders, an incubator where we can grow some of these projects forward. It was a 2-day event where we brought local community members who are affected by various disabilities together with local companies that are making assistive technologies, local researchers who are interested in trying to solve real world problems, and students who are looking for meaningful, impactful projects that they can, feel like they're putting their skills to good use and service of others. So we pulled them all together, and then the paradigm is the local community member with a disability brings a particular life activity that they are facing difficulty achieving, and they pose it to the group as a challenge. So um, this year's event, we had sponsorship from GitHub and Smartbox were two sponsors that were really wonderful and supportive. Smartbox makes a grid-based eye tracking um, AAC device, which is used by people who want to be able to communicate outward, but maybe have severe speech impediments or motor disabilities so that they can't type. So they'll stare at a screen. Where their eyes are pointed at the screen is tracked with a camera. And as the eyes pass over certain words, those words are synthesized and spoken by the computer. Um, there are other interfaces to it, but this is one use case of their technology. With the current, the sort of traditional AAC systems, it was a grid of words, and the person had access to one word responses. So if you said, "What do you want?" they could not say, "I would like a hamburger." They could find, hopefully, a hamburger icon. They'd stare at it, and it would say hamburger, which got the job done, but wasn't a full participation in the beautiful poetry that is everyday discourse. And so as AI starts to develop, and statistical inference on speech patterns start to develop, these simple one word responses have evolved into sentence generation. So maybe the person picks the object, the subject, and the verb, and the system doesn't just say those three words, it composes it into a meaningful sentence that has grammar that's compatible with most people's sort of verbal processing skills. With the advent of more advanced AI and LLMs, you can generate, fairly complex thoughts, and you can present those to the user, and they can choose whether one of them represents what they're feeling more than the other. So the paradigm now is shifting towards pick a few words, we'll start representing larger possibilities of complex representations of your inner world, and then you can choose which one aligns best with the moment. That kind of predictive and complex communication from a few words is, one particularly interesting challenge that I think Smartbox is tackling in a very clever way. Not only because I'm biased that they're working with me, but I think they're really deeply committed, and they've positioned themselves well. It's one of these powerful things of an industry partner, and scale and reach is, an assistive technology developed in an academic lab that is not, licensed and protected and doesn't have longevity or reliability, is not something that somebody with a disability should learn to rely on because it's not reliable. A company like Smartbox has found a way to persevere these products and these offerings, and they're very careful about rolling things out in a responsible way. Um, so so this was one of the really fun challenges, was we got to sit down, have, academics like myself who are working at the intersection of AI and assistive technology, local community members who are AAC users, and this commercial partner who is on the ground with their technologists, with their lead developers, and their user experience designers. And we sat down and tried to decide, do we display a giant paragraph of text to the person? How many words before we start giving them options? There's a lot of design decisions to be had in this process, and a lot of technological decisions to say, you know, should we use a camera and just infer based on the moment suggested possible responses that the person could make? Do we essentially make the decision for them about what they want? Or do we give them the agency to pick a few words in order to seed the AI in order to generate those responses? These are really complex technological,
Yeah,
psychological questions that we have to work
wow.
together to form.
And it's easy to see why to students it's such a fascinating and kind of vital area to be involved with, because you've got the kind of intersecting modes of user interface patterns and AI technology and all of this. Um, I think to connect it back to the publishing industry, my next question is really for both of you. You presented together, I know, at in October at the George Washington University Ethics in Publishing Conference in Washington, D.C. I think you talked about how publishers and universities could work together for accessibility. So perhaps you could talk a bit more about kind of how the rubber can hit the road, and what happened in that conference.
Yeah, so I'll maybe kick off there, and I'll hand over to Kyle to improve and elaborate on what I'm saying. Um, so basically, Kyle just talked very eloquently about the student symposium that he ran, and the GW Ethics and Publishing Conference is a student conference that is run by the people who run the publishing master's program at George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And basically, the conference was made up of various panels and presentations by people talking about some of the hot button topics in publishing today. So including things like research integrity, so things like image manipulation, for example, talking about things like, for example, innovation in production, talking about, for example, how to revamp editorial boards, all of the different things that students may want to know. And it was a mix of student presentations and also presentations by, industry leaders, if that doesn't sound too pompous. And so Kyle and I were a part of a panel that also involved Jennifer Kemp, who is a consultant and does a lot of important work around open access. And also we had a representative from Atipom as well, the platform provider. And we were talking about initiatives within the publishing industry aimed at increasing participation and inclusion with a focus on accessibility. So, I was talking about what's happening at Elsevier, where I work. Obviously, Atipom talked about the work that they were doing, and obviously Kyle talked a bit about all of the great stuff that he's been doing as well. And I think the thing that really heartened me was really how engaged the students were and how understanding they were about this intersection of publishing and technology in order to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to read, learn, and fulfill their potential. Kyle, what have I missed?
I don't know that you've missed anything. I think those were the essential bits. But I do think some of the stuff that still burns bright in my heart was the specificity of partnership development that can only happen through a prolonged conversation. So before the panel, we got to sit down for an hour and have deep dive introductions to each other and try to define some of the mechanisms of partnership, because there are the larger philosophical, interesting things to me academically around what is a university, what is a publisher, and then there's the far more specific and essential, how does Kyle Keane, a senior lecturer at University of Bristol, work with Simon Holt at Elsevier? Like, that is a very different question. And what are the technological partnerships where, if I train a new large language model that I believe to do better scientific verbalization of complex graphics, how is that actually deployed, and what are the important industry considerations for, every 6 months maybe I could deploy a new large language model that would be a multimodal translation of scientific graphics into text. But if every time I do that, you have to, as a publisher, Elsevier would have to rerun it over, whatever, millions and millions of different graphics. And do they keep each version of that alt text so that somebody who read it once in 2024 and then comes back and looks at that same article in 2027, do they get the alt text of the latest LLM's translation, or do they get the original that maybe they read in 2024? Or do they have to have versions of all of those? That's not only a complex redeployment issue, there's a separate technological interface that a publisher specifically in their software stack is going to need to worry about, which is versioned alt text, or the policy decision to only give the latest one and accept that science will potentially just change under the feet of blind screen reader users as they try to access scientific articles year after year. Those are really specific and complex technical challenges that only a developer at Elsevier can know how they handle alt text injection into their articles. And when a person goes to grab that file on a website, how is that actually being rendered to the screen reader to be read? It's an amazing, drop from the profoundly, overwhelmingly large, complex world to the incredible specificity of okay, how many person hours is it going to take to implement that change? Is it going to hit any compatibility issues? Are there legal issues with doing that? If you replace it or if you leave it, are there going to be implications for the, propagation of scientific knowledge in the world? Those start to spin up all of these machines inside of, these incredibly large and important companies like Elsevier. And that takes time to build that relationship, to show that there is reliability, to show that it wasn't just a fleeting idea, but something that can actually be stabilized on the time frames that these organizations tend to move.
Right, and I think it really shows how lucky we are that somebody like you is in this space, with both the mind of somebody who has a background in software development and understands the need to actually make things work, uh, but also an interest in the philosophical and a kind of purpose-driven side of all of this. I think having people solely in one side of that equation can be problematic.
Yeah, it's true. Right, right. It is true. I cause myself a lot of internal friction because I try to constantly compare and contrast my different past identities with each other. So I think, okay, all right, that was a great academic assertion. Now let's roll back to software developer Kyle and remember all of the implications of every feature request that I would spin up inside of that, medium to small sized software company. And then, oh, yes, let's think back to the issues that even that software company had when it tried to interface with the larger publishers and trying to define some of those. And having just come through all of these different roles, I kind of go back to past versions of myself and I use these moments to try to just constantly challenge everything, which does mean that I move much slower than a lot of academics might because I'm constantly challenging myself with previous knowledge of the issues that would otherwise be discovered along the way. So I'm trying to actually move slower in a short time scale so that I can move quicker on the long time scales and anticipate a lot of those failures and have more sustainable, successful partnerships.
Love that. Love that.
And I think also to kind of circle back to where we began, a crucial element of that, Kyle, is your own lived experience, right? Now, obviously for me, I also have lived experience, and I think you can have all the theoretical knowledge you like, but one thing I always say at work, and I'm sure you do as well, in fact, I know you do, is we don't know if any of this stuff is going to work until we road test it with the ultimate people that matter, who are the people who are actually living this um, every day. And I think, we talk about standards and we talk about laws, and I think they're really good baselines. But I think that something that you obviously is very close to your heart is to mine is this point that until we're involving people with disabilities ourselves, um, in the development and road testing of all this, we don't really know what's going to work and what's not going to work.
And I think I've started to wrap my head around another element of that that I never appreciated. So absolutely, things that are beautifully designed. I spent years building some of the coolest stuff ever. I'm still convinced of it. And I would show it to somebody and they would have no cognitive model for it. They'd have no scaffolding is what we call it in educational research. They'd have no way to understand the thing I built. And so even if I brought you the coolest quantum computing thingy mabobber, if you had never heard the word quantum or computing, you would just say, okay, that's a cool, who's it, what's it thing. So involving communities early and having them design a thing has the extra added benefit of having the system learn as it builds and adapt to the thing that it is designing. So having communities design from within informs the decisions as well as educates the community and allows for a level of trust and reputation to build from within the community that will otherwise mean that the thing won't ever be adopted. So if you involve a community long term and some of their core members start to understand, engage, and learn how to train others and how to use this and gain value out of it, and start to say, I trust this, it works, I've used it now for a long time, that allows for slow adoption. And when you're trying to scale things, one of the great benefits of a company like Elsevier, it can make long-term strategic plays that involve, having a community design, adapt, learn, and train itself to engage with the system. But you can only do that in really close, tight feedback loops with those communities.
All of this is endlessly fascinating, and I think we could all, probably keep going forever, but we are amazingly already up on our hour. So just a couple of quick bits before we let you go, Kyle. What are your plans for 2026 and beyond? What are you thinking about at the moment?
Ooh, 2026 and beyond. Okay, how how strange and fantastical should I get?
Oh, as much as you want. We're all about that.
Okay, all right. So I hinted at. Okay, so I'll start hopefully relatable, and we will scaffold towards the fantastical. So I started by mentioning publishing standards um, need to include audio as a thing. So I'm presently working on a system that does kind of interactive spatial audio, which is something that I think is, hopefully next generation technology. So if you can play stereo music through headphones, then you can play some version of spatial audio using head related transfer functions through headphones that can induce in a certain portion of the population a sense of the sounds coming from around their head, outside of their head in the world, in this sort of virtual world. I'm interested in allowing those experiences to become interactive. So if you hear, a voice talking at you in front of you, you can, move your finger on the screen and that voice is going to rotate around your head a little bit. And then maybe you can bring a new voice in and build a sonic environment in which now you have somebody over to your right, somebody out in front of you, and you're able to change some of the parameters inside of that world so that you're working in this interactive audio environment. One of the fascinating things about human perceptual capability is our ability to do multi source localization. So if you're standing on a street, you can point at the sound of cars passing by and point at the sound of multiple people speaking around you. So you have this big spatial information capability that's significantly more than if you just have a single audio source. So trying to move into building audio systems that are capable with the higher order capability of humans kind of deeper spatial reality construction is something that really fascinates me. Technically, that's not actually too hard. We, right now you can embed an audio file that has a little player and you click play and it plays the audio file. If you have stereo, which is fairly standard, there's lots of stereo audio players, fine, you put two channels. If you want higher order ambisonics, then you want to have even more than two channels of audio, which is not an impossible task. We just need some standards to ensure that people actually implement it. But standards will be driven by demand. So I'm going to try to innovate, drive something so that people start to say, we want that. And then companies will hopefully say, yes, great, we will build standards so that we can support that thing that you want. Once we have multi-channel audio sources, we can do either ambisonics, which is an approximate acoustic field around a person's head, or we can do multi-source spatialization, where inside of the player itself we can place these sound objects around the head and in real time add these kind of spatialization effects. Um, Moving even further, making those interactive, where we're now talking about kind of virtual reality where you're in an environment and, an NPC, a non-playable character, comes up and starts talking to you about a scientific concept, and you say, okay, wait 1 second, let me bring in this other scientific publishing author so that I can ask them some questions about what you've just said. And I spin up another avatar, and then I start talking to that other avatar. And now instead of reading 2 published articles, I have 2 LLMs that are presenting as sonic interactive avatars that I'm now talking to. And then I can even say, what do you think about what they just said? And I can start to have a nice little debate where I'm facilitating these complex social systems
Amazing.
where each one is fed by the publications that have been gathered by these, incredible institutions that have huge databases of scientific content. Then we can start to, have on demand conversations similar to this podcast that you're generating here, where you're in control a little bit of the flow. You ask a question to one, you ask a question of another, you ask one about the other, and you can, have a story emerge. And giving that agency to content consumers is something that really interests me. And it even probably gets weirder and more fantastical from there. But maybe that's like and subscribe
Yeah.
for more details on that.
In fact, on that note, how can people follow along with your progress and maybe get in touch?
I wish I had a better answer. I mean, KyleKeane.com is a website that I don't always keep super well up to date.
What about LinkedIn? That's usually people's
LinkedIn's a great
favorite
one. Yes,
place.
yes. LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure I'm Kyle Keane on LinkedIn. So
Excellent.
presumably I should be an easy to find LinkedIn candidates. But
Brilliant. And before we sign off, Simon, anything else you'd like to leave the listeners with?
No, Kyle, that was absolutely fantastic. I learned a lot, and I just wanted to wish everybody listening to this a happy, healthy, and accessible new year.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you so much, Kyle. That was a really fascinating, wide-ranging discussion, and there's a lot to think about.
my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll sign off here, but tune in. We'll be having plenty of episodes this year, and we'll try and hit a wide range of digital publishing topics. So until then, this has been the Digital Publishing Podcast. Happy New Year.